It was the color that stopped her. A pale, almost silver patch on granite, shaped wrong, too deliberate for a blotch, too small to be a signature of wind. She bent close, breath fogging in the cool air, and pinned her flashlight so the texture flattened into a single line of light. She traced it with a gloved fingertip and whispered to herself, "Are you seeing this?" The mark could be a number, it could be an initial, it could be nothing at all, but it looked like a crooked date.
Listen closely now. Welcome back to Nature's Dread. I'm Sam Nang. Find somewhere dark, put your headphones on, and listen closely. This is a story called The Lichen Ledger, When Stone Keeps the Score. Tonight, we follow a seasonal ranger who starts to read the landscape and discovers that attention can turn quiet growth into a ledger of absence.
She worked summer shifts doing rock surveys, camera, GPS, logbook, boots scuffing granite, the cold smell of rain when it turns the world sharp. The park was mostly granite and scrub, trails that forget to exist, and boulders that had names no one remembered. She kept meticulous notes. It was practical, ordinary work. Count lichens, record species, map microhabitats. Nightly, she would download photos, stitch coordinates, and go home smelling like the forest had been pressed into her clothes.
The first odd thing arrived as a photograph. A patch of foliose lichen framing the edge of a small cleft, sun-bleached, pale, arranged so the gaps and raised lobes read, if you squinted, like the letters M 1984. She typed that into her log out of professional habit, then paused. That combination, an initial and a year, matched a decades-old missing person report in a county file she half remembered from a museum visit. She told herself it was coincidence. She turned the image into her supervisor and moved on. But she kept the photo. Then other stones began to look like notebooks, little knots repeating across miles, a loop here, a cluster of dots there, lines that could be read as initials, as coordinates when aligned with trails. The patterns weren't scattered. They behaved as if someone, wind and time, had been drawing in the same hand for years. She cross-referenced her notes against old search logs and found, with growing unease, that several marks clustered near sites where families had once combed the scrub and found nothing. It would have been easy and safe to stop there, to call it pattern-seeking, the human brain's hunger for meaning. But she did what her training taught her. She asked experts. A lichenologist explained that lichens register microclimate, mineral changes, and sometimes the chemistry of past surfaces. Growth patterns can mimic lives, banding that maps drought cycles, scars that reveal past burns. That doesn't mean lichens write messages. The scientist said that plainly. Yet, she also told the ranger that in long-lived, slow systems, repeated disturbances and human touch can create semi-regular motifs. That was the key word, motifs. A geomicrobiologist added that minute mineral leaching around a peg or a piece of leather could feed a tiny network differently, making the lichen grow in subtle directional ways. An archivist, tired and thrilled in equal measure, dug out search maps, old newspaper clippings, and a handwritten list of abandoned campsites. He warned, off the record, that sometimes the landscape remembers in ways that are inconvenient for tidy bureaucracies. I want to be careful here. These are hypotheses grounded in biology and archives, not supernatural proclamations. We mark where the evidence stops and the questions begin.
The pattern hardened into a path. The ranger plotted coordinates and discovered lines that suggested a route of sorts. Trailheads abandoned, an old logging road, a cliff face people used to avoid. She hiked with her pack, camera, and a map that felt more like a riddle each time she checked it. One evening, she followed a chain of glyphs that led off a main trail into a tangle of hemlock and moss. At the end of that chain, placed like a footnote, was a single cluster that matched the initial of a family name,
an initial that had appeared in a case file. She felt it in her chest, a thin electric pull between duty and dread. She made a choice. She planted a discrete marker at a coordinate implied by the ledger, GPS only, no flags, and she left a note with rangers at the station. The next day, a woman called. Her voice was careful, as if it had practiced grief into a polite tone. Her last name matched the initial that had appeared on the stone. She didn't ask for answers. She asked if anyone had been looking. That call changed the ledger from an academic oddity into a human map. Suddenly, every mark seemed to have a family at its edge.
Then came the night hike. She set out alone because single shifts and narrow budgets rarely allow companions, because obsession has a way of shrinking the world to one mission, because she wanted to know what the ledger would say when read aloud. The path narrowed. Her headlamp cut a cylinder of apprehension out of the dark. Branches rasped like loose paper. She reached a cliff face, vertical and cold, covered in a dense, script-like lichen. She held the camera up, recorded its texture, and then, with a tremor she couldn't hide, began to read.
She read names as if speaking inventory. The sound of her voice in the quiet seemed to make the lichens draw breath. She said a first name. She said a year. The rock felt ancient and utterly present. For a moment, she believed reading it would release an answer, coordinates, a memory, a place to turn to. Then she realized what reading asked of her: attention. And attention given changes things. To name is to disturb. To map is to decide what is preserved and what is probed. Her flashlight slipped. She caught herself on rough stone. A small rock shifted. That shift, nothing to anyone else, felt enormous to her. She understood that some stones might not let go of what they keep.
After that night, the conversations changed. Park officials worried about traffic and people prying at fragile communities of lichen. Families wanted more, answers, searches reopened, paths cleared. Scientists cautioned restraint. The ranger found herself between two obligations: to help answer a human absence and to protect an ecological surface that had been quietly keeping chemical and climatic memory for decades. She chose to document thoroughly, anonymize where needed, and push for coordinated, minimally invasive search methods. She insisted, no scraping, no chalk, no rubbing of surfaces. The ledger would be read, not carved.
There are limits to what we can declare from a pattern. Sometimes weather makes letters. Sometimes a boot or a buried post redirects growth. Other times, attention itself shapes the story. The more you look, the more the world seems to answer. I want to be clear. Where I stray into what-if territory, I am asking a question, not asserting a law. We treated these lichen marks as hypotheses, cross-checked biology against archives, and kept identifiers anonymized when families were involved. We warned listeners, and I will warn you again, not to go hunting for these marks. Do not touch, do not mark. If you feel moved, contact local authorities or park scientists. Leave the surface to its slow work.
In the days that followed, some cold case files were reopened with new eyes. Small discoveries followed careful, sanctioned searches. Items at the edge of erosion. A campfire pit that matched a long-lost report. Nothing cinematic, nothing that wrapped the ledger up in a neat bow. Instead, incremental clarifications. A few families getting a piece of information they didn't have before, and other questions that multiplied. The ranger didn't become a hero. She became tired in a new way, aware that attention can heal and harm at once. The last image I keep returning to is small, a glyph the size of a thumbnail, a pale knot with a tiny fork that might read like an initial, or might be the result of a mineral vein beneath the stone. It sits on a ledge that catches the dawn. In the right light, you can almost convince yourself it spells something human. In the wrong light, it is a weathered crescent. I will not tell you which is true. You can choose what you see. The landscape keeps its ledger whether or not we read it, and sometimes reading means deciding who gets to ask questions and who must be left alone to remember.
If this story stayed with you, if the idea of stones that remember has burrowed under your skin, share it with someone who listens in the dark. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And remember the small, practical things. Parks protect living surfaces. If you ever think you found something, report it to rangers or scientific staff instead of touching it yourself. I'm Sam Neng. Until next time, check the corners.